Um, the There was once a traveling charity collector, sometimes known as a mashulach, who
Sure.
or that too, who came to visit, and he had a little Dvar Torah to share. And his Dvar Torah was, why is why is the first blessing in the Shemona Esrei atachonin le'adam dat, that you, God, gave wisdom to man, you gave man the ability to understand. And his answer was, because if you if you a sick man knows that he's sick, and a person in the midst of a war knows they're at the midst of a war. But
Yes.
someone who is of unclear thinking is rarely aware of the fact that their thinking is unclear,
My phone
and that
for
the fact that the brain controls the entire body and the entire mind, the entire body, speaks to how the importance of your mental outlook, your mental state, your ability to perceive things. It's just absolutely critical to everything that you do. And so, in a way, this lecture, Achron Achron Chaviv, this is our last lecture in our speaker series sponsored by Arnold and Anita Silber, which has really been the world at your doorstep. It has brought us experts from Jerusalem, from New York, from all over the world to share with us. But maybe it's most fitting that we end with Rachel Tuchman. Um, Rachel's expertise is really in the areas where real life starts to undermine our mental health. She has a specialty in fertility, but as well she deals with anxiety, and also has a specialty in an area which is called healthy at any size, which helps people negotiate their own personal sense of self worth versus the body images that they might see at the checkout counter. I'm also very proud to say that she graduated from the same program, the Furkhoff Einstein Psychology School, that my wife Sorel did in New York City, connected to Yeshiva University. And perhaps her greatest qualification of all is that she was educated in the Beis Yaakov of Toronto together with Rachel Lewinsky. So she's we all share Rachel Lewinsky in common as a friend of Rachel Tuchman's, and Rachel has also appeared alongside some of the great luminaries of the modern Orthodox world, notably Rabbi Mordechai Willig, and she regularly features in in many um, in many different fora with other scholars, and we're really privileged to have her here with us. Just once again, I wanted to thank Arnold and Anita for making this program possible, and it's my pleasure to now turn I guess the Zoom floor over to Rachel Tuchman. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us. We really appreciate you making time for us, even though it's late at night for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having me. And thank you to Rachel for organizing this. And I'm not going to share stories about our days in Beis Yaakov. I'll just let everyone assume that we were like lovely, well-behaved high school girls. Um, so our topic tonight is self-care, learning how how prioritizing yourself is the most selfless thing that you can do. So I just want to start with a question that I'm going to put out here, and I think the answer is pretty obvious. When is the last time that you felt stressed? So I know for you guys in Canada and Vancouver, the pandemic is still very much a problem, still very much a stressor. I'm here in New York where things are starting to get a little bit better. Vaccinations are really speeding up and happening here. So we're slowly returning back to life. But I know that in Canada, I have family in Canada and Toronto. I know that things are really stressful and difficult there. So I'm assuming the time you were stressed was probably right before this Zoom started at some point today. Um, Maybe you were watching the news, or maybe you were trying to get a vaccine, or reading about the vaccine, or arguing with someone about the vaccine, or dealing with something pandemic related. Maybe you have work or financial stress or family or marital stress. We've seen that this pandemic has really taken a toll on people's mental health, on their physical health, on their emotional health. We've seen like loneliness and overdoses, and quarantining has created a lot of, again, increased anxiety and depression, job loss. People have been hit in so many different areas from this pandemic. It's so much more than just, COVID-19. It's also all of the mental health um, issues that we're seeing that will far outlast the pandemic. So even once, it's gone and COVID-19 is a thing of the past and everyone's, safe and healthy, and this is not something that's risky anymore to our physical health, we're still going to be looking at the ramifications of what all of this past year and a half has done to us emotionally. Um, Another question I want you to kind of think about or pay attention to is like, what is the running dialogue, monologue that you have in your head throughout the day? Is it a helpful monologue or is it a harmful monologue? A lot of the time we don't even realize throughout the day our self-talk. And that's something that I want you guys to think about now, and especially, after this evening, to even pay attention tomorrow, like what you say to yourself throughout the day when things are stressful or hard. Are you saying, you know what, like we can get through this, I can ask for help, I can reach out to people? Or are you like, man, like my life and there's no end in sight, and nobody cares about me, and I'm such a fool, or ugh, I'm always messing up? Like, how are you speaking to yourself? This is very important. You're inside of your head all day. It's very important that you make it a very pleasant place to be, as difficult as that is. So before I get into like the meat of my talk, I just want to have you guys indulge me for a second and just plant your feet on the floor in front of you, wherever you're sitting. If you're sitting on a couch or in a chair, try to just straighten up your back, put your shoulders back, unclench your jaw, relax your neck, make sure your shoulders are down. And I want you just to close your eyes. And I want you to take a second and just sit with your eyes closed and inhale through your nose, a deep breath, and feel your chest kind of rising as you're inhaling, and exhale through your mouth. And just do that one more time. And while you're doing that, inhaling through your nose, just feel like your whole body taking in that air, and exhale through the mouth and let your whole body drop with that. And now you can slowly open your eyes. And that, like 2 seconds, was self-care, right? So when we hear self-care, we think, oh, I have to like spend money. I have to go to a spa. I have to plan a vacation. I have to go out to lunch. I have to get my nails done. I have to, get a massage. There's a $10 billion industry that wants you to think that self-care is expensive and it's what they're selling, but it's actually not that. And what they're trying to sell you is not restorative in the long term. Like, it'll make you feel good temporarily, but it's not something that we know from a mental health perspective that's something that's lasting. Stress is actually one of the leading causes of health problems throughout the US, Canada, and worldwide. We know that stress can lead to heart conditions and all kinds of physical ailments. So this year, especially because we've seen so much stress and anxiety and depression, we have seen a decline in people's health, not strictly related to getting COVID, but just other things that we've seen. So the benefits of self-care are that we see increased health, right? We see better productivity. We see that you can make time for things. You have better focus. We see improved resistance to illness and disease, right? There's evidence that most self-care practices can activate a part of your nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system, which means that your body goes into a restful mode, and that helps to fortify your immune system. We know that when we're feeling run down and we're feeling stressed, we're more likely to get sick, right? So if we can be in better physical health, if we can sleep more and make sure we're drinking water and make sure that we're trying to reduce our stress and making sure that we're connecting with people that make us feel loved and cared about, and we're involved with our community and we're in touch with our rabbi, we will see that we have better physical health, fewer colds, less stress equal better immunity, enhanced self-esteem. You realize that you have more value and that you matter when you're taking care of yourself. We know also that engaging in self-care, we see, like they've done again, like physical body scans where they've seen that like even someone's sphincter relaxes in their GI tract, right? And we know again that when you're stressed, we see things like constipation, digestion issues, it conserves your energy, self-care, right? We see a slower heart rate, right? We're not as stressed out. So self-care really does show up in our bodies. We see that we feel better, we look better health-wise, meaning internally, when we are engaging in self-care. Research shows us that many people misunderstand what effective self-care is and why it's beneficial. So we know that 35% of people think that self-care is possible only for people with money. So they'll say like, oh, I would love to do that, but like I can't afford to, like I don't have any, it's I'm paying for this and I'm paying for that and I just don't have enough money. 44% of people believe that it's for people that have time, right? So again, there's another excuse. Oh, I don't have time. I'm too busy with work, or I'm too busy with, the grandkids, or I'm too busy with my kids, or I'm too busy with whatever it is. Again, we're led to believe that you need time and money for self care, and it doesn't have to be expensive or time consuming. And just like I showed you when we first started, that 2 seconds, whatever it was, 5 seconds of just like calming your body down and being in touch with your breathing and feeling your surroundings, feeling your feet on the floor and feeling the chair underneath you, that's a form of self care. Self care is defined as any activity that we do deliberately to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. So it's anything that you do for yourself that feels nourishing. Good self care refuels us. It's not selfish and it's actually very kind, right? And if you think about it, when you are in a calm, cool, collected place, you're able to respond better to people. So even think about maybe over the past few months, if you've seen something scary on the news, or in a WhatsApp group, you got, some scary link or a scary story, and it stressed you out, like how you reacted when you put that phone down. Were you able to be calm, cool, collected, or did you feel on edge, or were you irritable, and were you snapping at your partner, or, feeling maybe checked out of doing things because of the reaction that you had? So when we're engaging in self-care, we're actually fortifying ourselves so that we can react better and we can cope with stress better, and that's actually a big part of self-care. It's also learning coping tools so that we can manage stress. It restores our energy, like I said, and it boosts our patience and our efficacy, right? So we don't snap at people and we're able to think more critically also. So if we get something in a WhatsApp chat and it's scary and it seems kind of like sensationalist, or something that's trying to get a scary reaction out of us, we're able to step back and be like, wait, is this true? Is this something that I should be reading? Should I click on that link? Should I see what this is saying? Or should I say, you know what, I'm just going to swipe past this. I'm not going to read it. It's not good for me today. I don't need to know what's going on all the time. Right. And I think that's important. A form of self care that I'm going to talk about in a little bit is really reducing our media consumption, because media really thrives on our fear and our anxiety. And that's a huge part of why we're thinking that we see such an increase in anxiety this year, because the media has really, one minute it's, this is going to kill you, the next minute it's going to save you, the next minute everyone's dying, the minute after that we're seeing, oh, it's going to be over. There's so much up and down. It's like a constant roller coaster with our emotions. So I say really reduce your media consumption, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how you can do that as I get closer to the end of this talk. But usually when we talk about self-care, there's like the classic analogy that everyone gives about the oxygen mask on the plane, right? So like what we hear when we talk about self-care is that you can't help others unless you're helping yourself. So we say, just like on the airplane, they tell you put on your mask before you secure anyone else's. That's what self-care is. So I don't really love that analogy, because I feel like that kind of feeds into this culture of like, you need to be in this like oxygen deprived state, like really at the ends of your wit in order to be engaging in self-care. So I don't love that analogy. I understand it. And I see, yeah, it is important that you kind of fill up your own cup before others, but I like to think of it more like tending to a garden. Self-care is more like being careful and consistent and planting seeds and adding sunlight and drinking water and removing weeds and laying low in the winter and blossoming in the spring, right? That's more what self-care is. It's like this gentle, loving, very intentional, constant thing that we do. And I think that's important for us to kind of think about, that it doesn't have to be that you're gasping for air and that you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't take care of anyone anymore. I've been depriving myself. It's more just this like thing that you're always doing, little things here and there, that 2 minutes of meditation, going through the drive through and getting yourself an iced coffee and sitting by yourself in the car, sitting outside on the porch, taking a walk, calling someone that you haven't spoken to in a while. things like that. Very little, small, but intentional things that we do to take care of ourselves. And if we can't take care of ourselves, again, we diminish our capacity to take care of others. So it is important to tend to our gardens, right? And really take care of ourselves. And I often say humans really, we are like plants, right? We need sunlight, we need water, we need people to like love us and take care of us, right? So this is the same thing. Um, and exhaustion should not be a prerequisite for self-care. And again, very often I see that. Something that I've seen this year, though, which I think has been very wonderful, is that a lot of the stigma in mental health treatment has kind of been like lessened, that more people are willing to say like, hey, I really think I need help, I need to speak to somebody, this feels very overwhelming for me and I can't do it. And I think maybe there was a safety for people and feeling like, you know what, I've never been through a pandemic before, like this is not a shameful reason to ask for help. So more people have been willing to seek out mental health treatment, which is a wonderful thing. And I think people are also realizing the value of mental health treatment, whereas before there was a lot of stigma around it. You have to have problems to be in therapy. It's only for people that have like mental illness. And really, you can be in therapy for any reason. And I think people should go even if they don't have issues, just to have an objective third party listener, someone who's there to kind of process things with you, to share your joys, to hear your sadness and hold space for it. So I think that we have seen an increase in people being willing to take that step and see a therapist. Part of it is probably also the Zoom element of it, that people feel comfortable with telehealth. It's not as intimidating to walk into, to be in your pajamas on your computer as it is to walk into a waiting room, of a therapist's office. And, maybe you're going to see someone, or sometimes it feels intimidating. So in that way, that's kind of like the silver lining, I guess, in terms of mental health, is that we see a lot more people reaching out for help. So I encourage you, if you feel like this is something you've been thinking about and it is something you want to do, there are definitely mental health providers who are willing and able to help. So I would encourage you to take advantage of that. Some of the toxic messages that we get from society that get in the way of our self-care and lead to burnout are, we have this idea of like no days off and rise and grind, right? We have all these like cute phrases that are really not cute. Work harder, stronger, faster. Rest is like not a productive thing, right? We're told that like if we're not doing anything, we're being lazy. And I always say that rest is actually doing something. Rest is restorative, right? It's built into our religion, right? That we know that God, who was creating the earth, on the seventh day he rested, right? So it's a godly thing, it's a holy thing, it's a spiritual thing. We believe that connecting with spirituality sometimes means doing nothing and just sitting and contemplating and meditating and resting and unplugging and disconnecting and just being either with yourself or with family or with community. So it's important for us to really stop and take advantage of that time, that we're able to just not have any obligation to work or anything else, and really use that time as restorative time. Um, so again, like I had said earlier, part of self-care is learning coping strategies to deal with stressors. And we know that in this year, Americans and Canadians have hit record high levels of stress, anxiety, and anger. There's been a lot of anger too. And specifically in the United States, for sure, there was a contentious election. Um, More recently, even tensions in Israel have really caused people to feel very stressed out. There was a crisis at the Capitol in January. Like, we've really been through it. In Canada, you have a government who, it seems, up until very recently, was really failing you guys in terms of getting you out of this pandemic. And something that I kept saying, witnessing it, was like, you would think that they hadn't seen like what the rest of the country was, what the rest of the world was going through in terms of how they've handled the pandemic in Canada. So it was really frustrating to see so many people experiencing the same things, where like they didn't really have to, or we could have learned from mistakes. So that's caused a lot of anger and stress, and a lot of people arguing about politics and cutting people off because of political beliefs. So there's been a lot of frustration and stress this past year, again, not simply just related to COVID, but just all of the other things that come along with it. So self-care is something that is important for us because, again, it prevents burnout. It helps us to kind of decide, like, is this an argument that I should be getting into, or maybe I should just like let it be? We can agree to disagree. I don't always have to prove my point. I don't have to get people to believe what I believe. I can just live my life and do my thing and let people have their beliefs. We don't have to polarize people. So I think that's an important form of self-care too, kind of knowing like which arguments you want to get involved in and which ones are just not a useful, a useful energy, a useful use of your energy. Vacations are nice to take, but again, since you're in a pandemic, travel is restricted. But in general, anyway, I always say vacations are nice if you can take them and if you love them, incredible. But I say that they're kind of like charging your phone for 5 minutes to 20% and then expecting it to last all day. Vacations are nice and they do restore you, but they don't last long. And that's why I say self care should be like little conscious things throughout the day, every day that you can do that are practical and easy and not expensive and don't cost you any money. They're really just things that you can do, meaning, like I said, if you get that WhatsApp from someone and you're like, oh, I can't deal with this right now. Self-care would be like, you know what, I'm not gonna read it right now, or I'll respond later, and letting that person know, like, hey, I'm just in the middle of something. I'll get back to this soon. That's self-care, right? Self-care increases our resilience, our motivation, and our ability to cope with stress. And without it, we have burnout, right? And burnout is psychological, emotional, physical exhaustion. It causes compassion fatigue, right? And we do see this a lot with mental health providers. This is something that we've seen, that mental health providers, if they're not taking care of themselves, I mean, even the medical profession as well, if you're not taking care of yourself, it's very hard to show empathy to other people. And if you're giving tons of empathy to everyone and none for yourself, again, you're like no good to anyone. So it's really important to, again, be engaging in that self-care and paying attention to like how it's making you feel when you're around other people. Are you feeling drained? Do you need some quiet time? Who are you speaking to and what do they do to your energy? And then thinking about maybe setting some boundaries in place, right? And boundaries are things that we set in place to kind of protect our relationships, to protect ourselves, to protect our relationships. So it might mean that you have to change a little bit how you interact with people, but that preserves the dignity of your relationship and prevents resentments. We know from a neurological perspective, we can rewire our brains by practicing self care. We can release endorphins and create all kinds of new neurotransmitters that really make us feel better and happier. Um, Something that gets in the way of us being good at self care is that we always put it last, right? It's not a priority. Again, we're always like, oh, I don't have time for it. It's not important. I have to do this thing and that thing and call that person and run that, committee and do this program. We feel guilty for it. We tell ourselves that it's selfish, especially if you're a parent or a grandparent or you have a job or whatever it is. We say like, no, I told this person I would do that, or I said I would be there. So we kind of put it last. And again, we also see it as a luxury rather than a priority. And I think that the reason we think it's a luxury is because of this kind of misconstrued idea of self-care being like pampering. When again, in reality, it's not. Something that I saw, also a statistic that I saw recently, was that the average person spends 93% of their time indoors, which I thought was like really kind of disturbing and upsetting. And I think it's for sure true for kids also. If they're in the classroom, they're spending most of their time indoors, and then they get home and they have homework and then they're on a screen or whatever. And again, going back to that analogy of us being like plants, we need to be in nature. We need to sit outdoors. We need sunlight. We need fresh air. We need vitamin D from the sun, right? It impacts our moods and how we feel, right? And we know, we've seen that like there's higher depression and anxiety rates in the UK where there's less sunlight, right? So if you have this like luxury of living in a place where it's sunny and it's beautiful, and I know that the West Coast, Vancouver, is beautiful. So definitely like get out in the sun, even if it's just like if you take a phone call, just to go outside and take the phone call if it's not too noisy or whatever it is, just to get that sunlight and the fresh air. It does wonders for us physically, which again impacts us mentally. The mind and body are the same thing. It's not separate. Mental health is physical health. Physical health is your mental health. It is one and the same. Our bodies start to tell us when we're stressed, right? Sometimes before our minds do. And that goes back again to that plant analogy. Like when we're not taking care of ourselves, like we start to feel it. And some of the things that might be indicating that you're stressed and overwhelmed are sleep issues. That's the most common one that we see with anxiety and feeling depressed or depressive symptoms. Digestive issues, so stomach aches, having trouble with certain foods that you didn't have trouble with before, or constipation, appetite changes, so you're not hungry or you're hungry all the time. headaches, fatigue, muscle tension. So that's why also when we started this, I was saying kind of like pay attention to your shoulders. Where are they? Pay attention to your jaw. Like, is it clenched? Is it tight all the time? Again, sometimes we don't even realize how tight we are until someone says, like, hey, like, put your shoulders down, sit up straight, like release all that tension in your body. And that's when we kind of notice, like, oh my gosh, I've been holding it like all up here, or all in my lower back, or all in my, wherever it is, my head. So we really have to pay attention to that. A lot of restlessness also I see in people feeling like, stuck in their house, or stuck at, if they're working from home and they're not having that social interaction, or staring at a screen all day long, right? A lot of Zoom fatigue too. It's really exhausting. So it's really important to take that time and to unplug and decompress and stand up and move around, and take care of yourself. Slow down, stop avoiding things. If you're supposed to be calling someone, talking to someone, dealing with something, do that. Seek help if you need. Like I said, mental health, reach out to your community leaders, reach out to friends, cry if you need to, right? Tears are actually a really good thing. They literally clean out our system. We know that there are chemicals that are released in our tears that actually help to get stress out of our bodies. So you really want to be making sure that whatever emotions you're feeling, don't stuff them down. Don't tell yourself like, no, I got to keep it together. I can't cry today. If you need to, you take that time and you cry, or if you're frustrated and you're like, no, I got to handle this. Like, where's my faith? Like, I'm not going to question this. This is how it's supposed to be. Right. I call that spiritual bypassing, when we're saying like, this is God's plan and like, I have to accept it and deal with it. You can believe that it's God's plan and you can be a very spiritual person and believe that you have to accept it, but you can also have feelings about it. You can also be upset about it, and you can have a conversation with God about it in whatever way that is, either through just speaking, like saying, hey God, this is me. Hey God, it's me, Margaret, right? Like, I'm talking here and I want to tell you how I'm feeling. Or like picking up a prayer book if that's something that's important to you. But taking care of that spiritual health too is so important. I always also say that self-care is like emotional hygiene, right? And sometimes when I phrase it that way, people start feeling like, oh, okay, it's actually not so selfish, right? Because just like you take care of your personal hygiene, your physical hygiene, we don't think it's selfish to take a shower. We don't think it's selfish to brush your teeth. We actually think that's kind, right? Like, not to inconvenience people by being unclean, right? It's taking care of yourself, but we also know that it's not considerate to not take care of yourself for the people that might be around you, right? So emotional hygiene, that's self-care. It increases our quality of life for us and for everyone around us. So self-care can be something that's relaxing or calming. It can be intellectual, like these speaker series, not me specifically. Everyone else was probably very intellectual. But coming to speaker series and learning, reading a book, taking an online course, doing the crossword puzzle, anything that kind of stimulates your brain, that's a form of self-care. It can be physical, again, spiritual, or practical. And spirituality, we know also, we've seen that there is research that shows that people that have spiritual connections tend to have a better quality of life because they feel connected. They have a higher sense of purpose. So if you're involved in your shul and your community, even if right now it's virtual and it feels a little bit disconnected, it's still something. And so I would say really hold on to that and take advantage of that. And when the shul offers you programming, like, get involved, see people's faces on a screen, even if it's on a screen. It's really important. And again, self-care can also be something, like I said, practical, anything that you need to do. So it could be going to the doctor, getting your checkups, going to the dentist, doing paperwork that you need to do. Again, people don't think that because they think, oh, but that's annoying. I don't like going to the dentist, or I don't like going for my annual physical. But that's actually self-care. Self-care doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable, but it's something that we know that we have to do. So I would say take care of your physical health. Make sure that you're on top of, if you have a chronic condition, go get your medications. Make sure you're taking them, right? That's important. Something that's so little that I find that whenever I say this, people are like, oh my gosh, it's so true. I find this more when I speak with teachers, that this is something that they really realize that they don't do, but it's something that is so important. In terms of self-care, is like, make sure that you go to the bathroom throughout the day. Like, how often have you been so busy that like you don't go, and either you're holding it in and then you forget that you have to go, or you're just holding it in and you're not going. And we know that that's not good for your body. So something as simple as like, when you feel the urge to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. That is self-care. Drink water, make yourself that coffee that you want. Take time for yourself and do the things that you need to do that nourish your body and your soul. Um, Some other things that I just want to kind of throw out there that I think are important forms of self care also are forgiving yourself for any mistakes that you've made, specifically over this year, also. And I'm sure that this has happened to lots of people, maybe not to you, or even someone, maybe someone did this to you. People probably acted in ways that were not, in line with really who they are, or were out of character for them, or maybe you did something that was out of character. It's really important that you forgive yourself and you kind of just say to yourself, like, it's been a hard year and I haven't felt like myself, or I haven't been able to, really be myself because I've been isolated or alone or confused or scared. It's really important to just forgive ourselves for the mistakes we make and say, I'm going to do better. I'm going to own up to it and I'm going to do better. I'm going to do better with my kids. I'm going to do better with my spouse. I'm going to do better with my, my neighbors, whoever it is. I think it's important to not compare yourself to other people. So you might see other people throughout this pandemic and you're like, wow, like how can their lives like look like they're amazing and they're not falling apart, but like we're falling apart. And I always say like you never know what goes on inside people's homes. It's just not helpful to look at other people and think that they're doing better than you. Always kind of keep the focus on you and your family and your life and what you're doing, because looking at other people just really steals the moments for you that could be very positive and helpful. Um, I think saying no is important, right? If you're not able to do something or you don't want to do something, you should feel the ability to say no, honestly. Because sometimes when we say yes to things that we don't want to do, it's not being kind at all. It's actually just causing resentment and making us feel, um, that we are kind of stretched too thin. So if you have to say no to something, say no. Or the opposite, say yes to things more. If you're someone that's always like, no, I can't, like, I'm not good enough, or like, they don't want to hear from me, or, ugh, what can I offer? Start saying yes and see that if people want from you and people want to be around you or invite you to things, like, show up and be proud and have that confidence. Um,
Rachel, can I just ask, interject a question about that one point?
sure.
Especially when it comes to saying no. Um, the issue that I think for a lot of us, or maybe I'm being a little too personal here, but a good portion of maybe our self worth or our sense of self worth is our ability to help other people and to be available. And so when we say no, we're good Jews. We have, the guilt just rages within.
Yeah.
And then, so we want to, maybe we're willing to trade the personal exhaustion for not being riddled with guilt for the fact that, oh gosh, this person really needed this and I just said no to them. So do you have any strategies on how you balance those competing forces?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And that's actually something I see a lot, right? I always say that when we don't want to say no to someone, that comes from a place of like people pleasing, right? We're afraid. And really people pleasing, I say, is really kind of like, it's more of a selfish thing. It's not so much I don't want other people to be upset. It's more I don't want to sit with the discomfort of them maybe being disappointed, right? And then it comes back to that guilt, like you were saying. So I think for us, we have to learn, and this is something that when I say it, it's you're all going to be like, well, that's easier said than done. But we have to kind of learn to just sit with the discomfort of sometimes knowing that we're going to disappoint people. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the wrong thing. And the analogy I like to give that I think is the most like, the one that really sticks with me, that I understand the most, that resonates with me is, when you had young kids and you were in the grocery store and they wanted a certain snack, let's say either it wasn't kosher or they had an allergy to it. Let's say they were allergic to it. And you say like, no, you can't have that. You're allergic to it. And they're like freaking out and crying, but I want it, but I want it, but I want it. And we don't give it to them. We feel bad that they're upset, but we don't feel bad with the decision. Like, no, this is literally like life saving. You can't have it. Right. So again, we have that empathy that they're disappointed, but we know it's the right decision. And so that's kind of the confidence that we have to build. Like, if I'm available and I can, and I have the time and I have the capacity, of course I want to do it. But if I can't, I'm not doing anyone any favors, right? And if I drain myself, then I'm not giving from a place of goodness and really wanting to. I'm giving from a place of fear and guilt and shame, and it's not helping the relationship. It might be helping other people, but it's not helping me, right? And again, we're not any good to other people when we're not coming from a place of fullness and wanting to give. So I think the answer would be to just say, you're going to experience some guilt sometimes when we say no. But again, that's not an indicator of instead you should have said yes. It's just, you know what, it's hard for me because I know that people are disappointed, or maybe disappointed, maybe they're not even disappointed, but that's hard for me to sit with. But I can handle that discomfort, and if I know that this is the right thing, I really can't do this right now, because that means I'm going to be sacrificing something else that I really shouldn't be sacrificing: myself, my time with my kids, my time with my spouse, my time at my job. Then I'm going to have to say no. And yeah, I think that there is this idea of like, in Judaism, even though I don't know where it comes from, because it's not really a Jewish value of like being like a martyr. But we're taught like we're supposed to be doing chesed, kindness all the time, right? But we know that even like, Abraham, and Isaac and Jacob, like they all had very clear boundaries, right? We know that even like we learn in the Torah that even Abraham's tent, like there was a time when it was like closed, and like that was it. Like there wasn't visitors, you know? So I think it's important for us to know that there's
I
a
think
time.
it's Rav Hirsch who says that when Avraham offers Hagar, or when Sarah offers Hagar, she was offering too much, and
Right.
that's maybe one of the sources.
Yeah. So I heard like Rabbi Shai Shechter once speak about it. Also, I don't remember exactly what his story was, but there was something about like the cloud being over the. I'm going to ruin it, so I'm like embarrassing myself here now. I really should have looked it up before. But he was talking about how the cloud over the tent was essentially like the sign of like, okay, like right now we're not accepting visitors, and then eventually like the cloud would move away, and then it was like visitors were allowed to come. So he was showing like even Avraham, who we know was like he was the guy that was the giver, the kindness, right? That was like his essence. Even he said, like, there's a time where I have to just like close the doors of the tent and like take care of my wife and take care of myself. So I think that's important for us to know. Like, we can't be endlessly giving and not restoring. We need to be filling ourselves up so that we can give back. And I think that's really important. So, but that's a great question, and I hope that I answered it in a way that's helpful. Um, some other ideas that I want you guys to think about is, again, just making self care. It's not a treat; it's a lifestyle, right? Again, so it's not like something that you earn or whatever it is. It's something that you create, that you do in every part of your day. So it could be that you journal throughout the day. Either if you have an app on your phone, you write in your phone, or if you have a notebook at night, you can do it at night, or first thing in the morning before you get up if you have that kind of leisurely time. Therapy, right? Therapy, I know it's not always accessible for everyone. It's expensive or it's a time commitment, but if you can do it and you have access to it, definitely something to consider doing. Um, Looking at pictures that make you smile. I don't know if any of you like have, Android phones or smartphones. Like Google does this wonderful thing that I get every day, that it like comes like Google Memories, and it shows me pictures from like 14 years ago, 7 years ago, and like they always make me smile. So it's like a nice thing to have if you have Google Photos, like, or whatever it is. Even I'm not an iPhone person, so maybe iPhone has that feature, just to like look at pictures that make you smile. Prayer in any form, and it could be meditation, it could be yoga, it could be praying from a prayer book, or again just speaking with who, whatever power, higher power you believe in, with God. Find playlists that match your mood. If you have, Spotify or, Apple Music or whatever it is, making a playlist that like makes you feel, either if you're sad, listening to sad music, or if you're happy, like feeling happy. Um, Enjoy your favorite foods, right? Food is an emotional experience in a good way. Food can be comforting. So if you're in the mood for something and you're like, you know what, I'm in the mood for like a hot chocolate, super random, but like, hey, I want that, like do that, or a cookie or whatever it is. Or I'm in the mood to make this like big salad, do it, whatever you're feeling. Schedule your checkups, like I said, go to the doctor, take care of yourself. Hobbies, things that you're interested in, that you've been wanting to do those things. If you, again, it's if you have that time. Text somebody you love, right? And just closing with a story that I read pretty recently, a couple of weeks ago. I was reading about, there was this self-help guru, psychologist, and he was like a world-renowned speaker. His name was Wayne Dyer, and he was giving like one of his like talks on stage, and he brought an orange to the talk. And he, asked someone in the audience, I think it was like a young boy, he said, like, if I squeeze this orange, like, what's going to come out? So he says, orange juice. And he says, "Are you sure? Like not apple juice?" And the boy's like, "No." He's like, "What? Not grapefruit juice?" And the boy's like, "No, orange juice." So he says, "Why do you think orange juice is going to come out?" So he says, "Because that's what what's inside an orange is orange juice." And so he said, like his kind of like aha with this was whatever's inside of you when you're under pressure, when you're feeling squeezed, like that's what's going to come out. So if you this year or you over the past few months, when you're feeling squeezed and pressured, you're feeling anger and tension and anxiety, like that's a sign to you, like you need to be taking care of yourself. That's what's inside. And we can change what's inside. We can make it that it's not bitter orange juice and gross like pulpy orange juice. It could be sweet and wonderful. So we want to make sure that we're kind of paying attention to our reactions, and we're listening to how we speak, and and we're paying attention to how we respond to people, and we're really taking a minute to step back and say, like, what do I need right now? This has been a very hard year, and going forward, as the pandemic, please God, for you guys comes to an end and life kind of goes back to normal, even paying attention to how you're going to feel. Maybe, I've seen this in my office, there's been tremendous spikes in anxiety as we were entering, normal life again. Once people knew, like, okay, they came out with this vaccine and they're saying like by spring we're going to be kind of like unmasked and back to normal. Some people were really afraid. They were like, I've gotten so used to this life, I don't know how to behave, like I used to anymore. So I would say, even just acknowledging that and saying, like, it's okay for me to feel this way. I've been out of practice. I've been isolated. I've been living in fear. I've been stressed for the past year. I need to just take time and re enter slowly at my own pace if I need to. I mean, if you don't want to and you want to rip off the mask and run out there when you can, great, more power to you also. But if you feel like you need that time and you're not ready to accept the invitations, or you're not ready to, take off your mask when it's time, or you're not ready to do whatever it is that you're allowed to do once things open up, like that's okay. And it's important for you to just go back into life at your own pace. Um, and to understand that whatever feelings you feel along the way are totally normal and expected, because again, like whatever you're feeling now makes sense. I think every reaction that we have in an abnormal situation is normal, and that's important to know. Like there's no right or wrong way to feel right now. And I think for you to just even acknowledge, like, whatever I'm feeling in these past few months is okay, and if I'm confused about it, I can ask for help. That's really important for you to do. um, so we have some time for questions if anyone has any questions.
I'm going to actually start with one. And I've opened it up and just remind everyone that if you do have questions, please feel free to direct message them to me, Rabbi Rosenblatt. You should be able to find me in the chat. Usually, the chat is in the bottom center of your Zoom screen. Okay, so my my question is, you mentioned media consumption and how that's promoting anxiety. I was just
Yeah.
curious, is the thriller that people watch on Netflix, does that produce anxiety the same way watching the evening news does, or do we separate between the fiction and the nonfiction?
So I think, I mean, maybe biologically, like I'm sure if, we like attached, if we did maybe like a brain scan, maybe we would see similar responses, meaning in terms of the chemicals that are released in our brain, just like we know, that when people eat sugar, we see the same reaction when they eat sugar as to when they like pet a dog or hug a baby, right? So we might see the same like neuro activity, but the response in our body and long term is very different, right? So if we're watching a movie, we know it's fake, so we might have that fear and we're like, oh my gosh, but our brain rationally knows it's not real. But then when we're watching the news and it's very much our reality and we're living in it, even if we sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm watching a movie, like how is this real? We know that it is, because then when we turn away from the TV, we see, like, I haven't seen my family in 6 months, or like I have someone knocking on my door to make sure I'm quarantining when I came back from the States, or whatever it is. It's our reality. So our brain really does know the difference, and our bodies know the difference. So there's definitely like a difference between like those stressors that are, from TV versus like our actual real life stressors. And that's important to understand, that our body knows the difference.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know. I guess we don't all have to cancel our subscriptions. Um, Another question is, Um, I think a lot of us have gotten used to living alone over the past 18 months. But I guess the common wisdom is that our social relationships are are really um, important to us, and emotionally. Would you say forcing yourself to return to social situations, um, whether it's going to a synagogue event or attending a birthday party, are things that we should put on our self care to do list?
So this is something that people have been asking a lot, and my answer is always that everybody needs to do what works for them. And I know sometimes there is a pressure to like go back to normal, right? That people feel like, oh, well, everyone's like, going out to these shul things or going out to these social functions. Like, I feel like I'm going to be missing out, or maybe I'm going to look like the weirdo that still wants to kind of stay home. For some people, also, I've seen specifically people who maybe have, in my work with infertility, this has kind of been like a really great respite for them, where they don't have to go and feel like that awkward person in the community that doesn't have children. Even people who are single, aren't married, older singles, that they don't feel left out of shul things anymore because there haven't been any. And so now going back out into the world, they're like, oh, I have to deal with this again, feeling left out and feeling like I don't belong and feeling like other. And so my response to them is like, you have to go at your own pace, whatever feels comfortable to you. If you're scared to go out in the world because you're still not married, you're still not pregnant, you got divorced, let's say, over the pandemic, and you're embarrassed to go out and show that, you have this different status now. I think that's important for everyone to just like do what makes sense for them at their own pace. I do think it's important also, though, to have in mind that for some people, even if it feels hard at first, like being involved in community is something that is very healing. And it is something that does make us feel more grounded. So if shul was important to you before, and it has been something that's kind of sustained you over the course of this pandemic, like getting back into it will be important, but just take your time. It doesn't have to be you jump back into it at the same pace that you were in it before. You take it slow. But I think that everyone kind of just has to listen to themselves and see what feels comfortable, in terms of how they re-enter. Um, and some people feel like they've been changed, like, oh, now I feel like I'm like less social, or I have social anxiety, right? And again, that's very common for people. If you haven't really socialized in over a year, it's going to feel awkward to like see people again. I know here, like when we started like unmasking in our shuls, it was the strangest thing to see people's faces again, and I had gotten so used to like not seeing, like just seeing this all the time, that it was so like it felt uncomfortable and even like weird at first. And even though I knew everyone around us was vaccinated and it was safe, it felt even unsafe and vulnerable. But I just told myself, like, I got to sit with that. Like, I know that I'm okay, and I know that we're following guidance here, and I know that my community is like very on top of safety precautions, and like we're all taking this very seriously. So kind of just honoring that fear and that discomfort, but also understanding, like, for me it was important to be back in shul, and I felt so grateful to be back there. So just understanding that we can hold like more than one emotion. It's not like either fear or like intense happiness. It could be fear and confusion and anxiety and happiness and relief and sadness and discomfort. We can have all of those things. And the answer is like, you just got to sit with it, and like eventually it'll sort itself out, and with time you'll get to where you need to be, but you just have to give yourself time.
Right. Okay. I guess maybe one last question is a little bit about metrics, and that is, how do you calibrate self care? Like, how do you make sure that self care doesn't just become some type of personal overindulgence?
Okay, so that's a great question. So the answer to that, I would say, is because the self-care that I kind of described is really not about like being selfish or being vain. It's really about just very simple kind of things that should be intuitive, like I said, like going to the bathroom, drinking water, making sure you get enough sleep, like calling someone you love, making a doctor's appointment, making a dentist appointment. Like, that's not indulgent. That's really self-respect and taking care of the body that we were given, right? And taking care of our minds. So I think that's very important. And I think that it becomes indulgent when we stop caring about other people, right? And it becomes like the only thing we want to do. And some people do kind of frame selfishness and self-care. They say, oh, well, this is for my self-care, or these are my boundaries, right? It becomes their excuse for when they want to like cut people off or be selfish or whatever. And so that's where I kind of say, like, if we're really not like harming people, and it's really something that isn't going to take much of our time, away from the things that we have to be doing, like taking care of our families or whatever it is. I think that that's important to kind of differentiate that it's not indulgent to take 2 minutes to breathe, or to call a friend, or to make time in your schedule to get together with someone, outside, or to sit outside and get sunlight. These are things that we literally need to do to survive. And I think that's important for us to really understand that again, our physical health, our mental health, they are this one and the same. And if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not good to anyone. We're not good for anyone.
Well, Rachel, I I thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, a really fantastic, and it was there's so much in there in that quick 45 minutes of presentation that you shared with us. Really, really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving us the an hour that was clearly not self-care. I think self-care would be heading towards bed at the moment for you. So I guess I'm glad that you didn't say no when Rachel called you and asked you to do this, because I think this is a really important piece for us, and for us to have, especially as we emerge beyond this. I You don't need to stay on to say bid farewell to Rabbi Fettergren, but I'm going to leave just for everybody who's here, I'm going to leave the same Zoom room open, and that program will start in approximately 7 more minutes. Once again, thank you to Arnold and Anita Silber, who sponsored this program. Thank you to all of you who, even on a beautiful evening in June, decided to come here and spend some time with us online. We're really excited about the fact that things really are relaxing here, and we will be able to not only engage in self-care, but we might be able to care for each other in person. So I appreciate everyone who joined, and I'm going to leave everything open in the very same location for the next 6 minutes when we will start our next program.
That's gonna be boring.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Yasher koach.
Hopefully, after the pandemic, we'll be able to welcome you back to Canada.
Yes, that would be
Amen.
To the nicer half, though.
yes.
We can introduce you to beautiful hikes of self-care in British Columbia.
I've always wanted to visit. I had, in all my time in living in Canada, I grew up there in Toronto. I never was on the West Coast, which is like embarrassing, but one day.
You're overdue. You're overdue. And
Yeah.
Rachel Lewinsky is an expert in all the hikes and camping. So she will.
Go camping. We're going to go glamping.
Glamping.
I know Rachel, trust me. You're all invited, every 60 people that are on here.
Do it. I'm in.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, Rachel.
Vacuum. There's a vacuum. Please don't tell me you don't know.
Voices because that's what I wanted to take it out.